Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me and see me. Does it work with sharing the screen? Okay. So, good morning. I was asked by Dirk to present some recent Eurostat work on using big data or other sources to improve the geographical granularity of the data that we have. Sorry. Wait. Sorry. Yeah. So what do we currently have? We have a problem in meeting the user needs, and we consider you as the users of the data, so you will probably know what I'm talking about. What user needs for assessing sustainability, it's often destination level data, even parts of destination, because a municipality as such can have tourism parts and non-tourism parts. Users typically need daily data or weekly data, and need data on flows, on transport, energy use, waste, and so on. However, what we can offer, we often only have annual data or sometimes monthly data, but then the monthly data is only at national level and not at the regional level. And we have some data on means of transport and duration of trips and so on. So we know that what we have is only in a fragmented way addressing the user needs. So what do we hope? We hope that the digital age that started some decades ago will also help us to solve these problems, because there's many new sources and new methods that we want to explore. You've all heard about big data, so this is one of the sources that we want to explore. It's sources that are not in our own statistical system, but from outside, and that can help us to improve the data. These sources have many benefits. We are sure that we will get a better timeliness, that data will be available faster, probably also a better quality, but this is to be compared with the data we currently have. We definitely aim at a better geographical granularity, which is what this presentation is about and which I will show in a minute. We also hope to have better temporal granularity. Instead of having monthly data, also data separately for specific weekends, for instance. And of course, we hope to have indicators that were previously unavailable, because what we are now doing, it's based on surveys, and surveys have their limitations in terms of length, of course, but also in terms of kinds of concepts you can expect respondents to be able to reply to. So by taking these information from the internet, from machines, some of these barriers are lifted. And of course, we also hope to find synergies with other fields of statistics, because often one of these sources can serve several fields at the same time. Sources that are relevant for tourism or anything to do with human mobility can also be relevant for population statistics, for instance. On the other hand, often one domain like tourism can be served by many different sources. For tourism, it would be scrape data, it could be payment card data, mobile network operator data, and so on and so on. However, the good news always comes with some bad news. There's also many risks and in particular constraints. What we've seen in our own work is that the access to the data is quite a problem. Even with data that can be scraped from the web, there is still an open legal issue about the use of the data. Can the data that is scraped from websites be used, or is it somehow the property of the website? Concepts and definitions. One of the issues is that when we develop surveys, we decide everything ourselves. We control the entire production process. When we rely on external sources, these sources were often not designed for producing statistics. So we have to live with the possibilities that the data sets offer. Selectivity bias is a problem, meaning that, for instance, take the mobile network operator data. Not everybody uses a mobile phone. Not everybody will use it in the same way at home as abroad while traveling. So these are things that we have to try to correct for when we want to use this data. Of course, these are also things that happen in our nowadays work, because now we base the data mainly on surveys. Also in surveys, we have non-contacts, non-response, and so on. So the problem is not new, but the possible solutions we have to find are probably new. Comparability over time is a problem. If you change from one method to another, there may be a break in series, and this is never good for users. Independence is a problem in particular for official statistics, because we are supposed to be objective and independent, but if if you rely in a heavy way from external sources, often held by private companies, there may be a conflict of interest that if you rely on a few companies, they might try to manipulate the data that gets to you. And of course, for just internal reasons, we need new skills to work with this data as compared to what we were doing before. It's also a matter of trust, finally, which means trust of those who produce the data, also those who use the data, that they are confident that the new methods give equally qualitative data or even better. And when I mention society at the end, it means that we also have to be aware that people might not like this reusing of mobile network operator data. They might feel some kind of intrusion of their personal data, although we are, of course, only interested in aggregates and anonymized data. But the perception is sometimes different. Now coming to the topic of the presentation, the geographical granularity. There's quite some work going on at the Commission to disaggregate the accommodation statistics in the first place, because this is where we already have regional data. One study or one set of experiments is using TomTom points of interest. So TomTom, the GPS information, they have hundreds of or millions of points of interest, and many are of course linked to attractions, to tourism-related things, and so on. So one of our GIS specialist has been working on this. The Joint Research Center of the Commission has been working on Scrape, TripAdvisor, and Booking.com data for the same purpose, to better disaggregate the accommodation statistics. There's other projects going on, but they're of a more experimental nature at this stage, is to use Wikipedia page views as a proxy for tourism visits, and of course the ongoing work on the mobile network operator data. But now I will focus on the first two on the slide. So what we hope to do is to improve the geographical granularity by using auxiliary sources that we were not using before. So the objective is to get a better detail of data than what we can currently offer to users. I will not go into the technical details, but the aim is basically, instead of having NUTS2, which is like corresponding to provinces, is to have data for smaller administrative units, or even to have data on like 1 kilometer grids or 100-meter grids, which is quite relevant for measuring sustainability, because sustainability is often, if there's issues around sustainability, it's often not at the destination level, but even in smaller parts of the destination. Imagine a coastal town. The problem with water supply or with waste may be just the strip close to the beach. So with this data, we hope to get closer to what users really need. I will show some examples later on. So the data used, it's, well, in the first place, our own data. This NUTS2 data that Eurostat receives from all the member states. And secondly, the auxiliary source is the TomTom points of interest. And the focus is on accommodation in this data set. We could use many other things as well, but in the first stage, the accommodation. So the points of interest labeled as accommodation were used to refine the data. So this is what we can currently produce. This is the NUTS2 map of Europe with the night spent at accommodation. And of course, the darker, the higher the night spent in a particular region. For measuring sustainable tourism, having data for the whole of Andalusia will not be very helpful, because it's a too diverse, heterogeneous region. With this additional data, we managed to make the data much more fine, and we have this is the NUTS3 data. The next step of the experiment was to try to obtain the same map, but then for 1 kilometer grids, and this is this map. I will go a bit more into detail about these results, and keep in mind the first map, which has the NUTS2 regions, which doesn't give a lot of detail, and then this one. We can observe quite special regions that we cannot observe with the current data. For instance, the ones with in group 1, it's the coastal areas. So of course, you do see a higher tourism intensity in coastal areas as compared to the rest of the regions in question. The ones that are with number 2, there's 2 of them in France. This is actually the river Loire and Rhône, which is also data we can otherwise not detect in our statistics. But now you see the concentration of accommodation along the rivers and of night spent along the rivers, which means that in these regions, the tourism part may actually be concentrated along the top attractions, which is then these rivers. The same for group 3, which is the cities. Normally a NUTS region, it's an administrative unit. Also in terms of tourism, for instance, the tourism in the greater area of Madrid or the greater area of Warsaw will of course be concentrated in the cities itself, not in the suburbs, not in the more rural parts around it. So with this data, we hope to come closer to what users really need in terms of detail. A second work that was carried out at the Commission is by the JRC, as I said. It's data on the night spent in accommodation establishments. The colleagues in JRC used data that they scraped from booking.com about the location of the accommodation establishments, and also data from TripAdvisor. Again, the location of accommodation, but also other tourism-related attractions, places, and also the number of reviews to get an idea of the seasonal breakdown. So whereas the previous study is more using the capacity as such, here by looking at the distribution of the reviews, they also try to take into account a bit the distribution over the year. I will not go into the detail. This is the background of this JRC project. So the aim that they had was to generate really small grids of 100 meter by 100 meter, as I said, based on data from Booking and TripAdvisor. This is a result, this gives for Croatia the monthly tourism density for January. Of course, January is not the top season for Croatia. This gives the same for April. So we see in the region just under Slovenia, it's becoming more busy. This is also one of the top coastal regions of the country. And this is the situation for August. So you see, like, well, you see the differences between the different months, and also the location at a quite detailed level. As I said, for us, this is quite interesting because this is data that we could not have in the past. This gives for the whole of Europe the top 5 and top 10 tourism locations in autumn, in spring, in summer, and in winter. So of course, in winter you see the concentration in the Alps, and of course cities like Madrid, London, Paris remain popular also in winter because it's typical city destinations. So finally, the colleagues in JRC also try to map all this information together to derive even more interesting indicators. This one gives the tourism intensity per net stream. They map this with the seasonality that they obtain by using this data, and by matching this intensity and seasonality, they prepared a map on like tourism vulnerability, which puts into perspective the intensity and the seasonality. It's very experimental. I mean, it's very, how call it, embryonical work, but it gives an indication of what kind of possibilities we might have in the future. So what are the next steps? We want to try to, I mean, not only to present this data in this kind of meetings, but also to disseminate it in, I mean, to share the methodology and the software behind it and the scripts, but also to publish it in, there's a part of the Eurostat website which is called experimental statistics, which is like a playground, but to raise awareness with users. So we definitely want to put this there in the beginning of 2018. And of course, the project is ongoing, because once you start with using this scrape data, you see further possibilities, further variables that could be of interest. So this is what our colleagues are doing. And the data I mentioned from JRC, there is a bigger report coming on soon. So to conclude, we see that the data actually works. There is some kind of proof of concept that blending the official data with auxiliary sources, be it geographical, be it scrape data, can actually enrich the analysis. We have resolutions and I mean, really detailed grids that were previously not available. So this is really a big change for us. And we also see, because of this more detailed data, new insights, as the examples that I gave for the riverbeds in France. And we do see that there's quite a promising way of producing more policy relevant indicators compared to the quite dry data that we can publish now. Thanks for your attention. I hope I more or less stick to the 10 minutes that was allocated. Just on the last slide, recently we published a paper on all the sources in terms of big data that could be relevant for tourism. It's freely available from Eurostat's website, so you just Google it and you should find it. For your information, this paper will also be reworked into a joint UNWTO Eurostat publication that should be out by the time of the statistics committee end of February. Thanks a lot for your attention.